Our three spin doctors today are editor at the Gatestone Institute, Ruthie Blum, social and political activist Mouab Khetab, researcher and author of The War of Return, Adi Schwartz. It is good to see all three of you. Thanks for coming on the show. Our four topics of discussion today with our esteemed guests are: a senior Hamas official admits that 50 of the 61 Palestinians killed on Monday near the security fence between Gaza and Israel were members of Hamas. We'll then discuss how Israeli-Turkish ties are spiraling out of control. Afterwards, we'll discuss the reaction in the Arab society inside Israel to the latest events. And time willing, we'll end with yet another embassy opening late today in Jerusalem, just 48 hours after the historic relocation of the American mission, this time Guatemala. Okay, our first topic is the situation in Gaza and its border with Israel after the violent events on Monday, resulting in the deaths of 61 Palestinians. Reports have surfaced that Hamas has sent a message to Israel offering to limit the number of protesters at the Gaza border in return for Israel easing off its airstrikes on Hamas positions in the Strip. Israel has warned that it may resume its policy of targeted killings of Hamas leaders if the violence continued. And in somewhat dramatic development in the past few hours, a senior Hamas official has announced that 50 of its members were amongst the 61 killed. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman had the following to say about the Hamas leadership.
I want to emphasize again, the Hamas leadership are a bunch of cannibals that treat their own children as weapons. There are rocket weapons, personal weapons, and there is another type of weapon, which is children or women.
Let's start with this statement by this Hamas official saying that 50 of the people killed, of those 61 killed on Monday, were part of the organization. Doesn't that mean that these protests were, A, not peaceful, and 2, orchestrated by Hamas? Mouab.
Well, this is actually the first time I hear about that, but let's assume, for the sake of argument, that they are indeed affiliated with Hamas. At the end, they are unarmed people that were shot at and killed by the Israeli soldiers. So whether they are affiliated with Hamas or not, they didn't carry any arms. Not even a single bullet was fired from the Palestinian side to the Israeli side, and yet more than 60 people were killed, including children. So are those children affiliated with Hamas as well? The answer is definitely not.
Ruthie.
First of all, those children were brought there by their parents, and Hamas sent them there, and Iran sent Hamas there. So to say that children were killed and all that, they shouldn't have been there in the first place.
So that is justified to kill them?
When you have a violent assault, you say it wasn't violent. It actually was violent. They had lots of weapons.
Did the children have weapons?
No, the children didn't have weapons. The children were the weapons.
Why were they killed by the Israeli soldiers?
They were brought there to be killed so that Hamas could say that Israel kills children.
Okay, let's move to Adi. Let's see you weigh in.
Yeah, I think that it doesn't really matter if it's Hamas or Fatah. I think we have to look at the bigger picture. It's not a coincidence that these events are March of Return. It's not about the closure, it's not about independence or statehood, it's about the return. And we have to remember that the main goal of these people is to cross the border and to regain what they perceive as their ancestral land, which is the whole of the land from the river to the sea.
Well, they weren't in that when they were going to cross the border, if they succeeded. They weren't exactly going to, they weren't coming with suitcases and going, to go to their homes in Ashkelon in the south of the country. It was a protest right there, wasn't it?
Well, we tend to minimize and we think that what's obvious to us is obviously obvious for them. But yes, this is the most fundamental ethos and narrative of the Palestinians. They lost the war in 1948, but they didn't give up their claim for the land. And they still see the state of Israel as an unjustified, as a colonial project that they will never agree to.
The Israeli daily Israel Hayom reported today that Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, was brought to Egypt to be reprimanded there and humiliated. He was even screamed at, according just to Israel Hayom. What do you make of this development? Could this be the reason of this announcement by this Hamas official to show that Hamas trying to show, basically, that it was not sending civilians, it was sending its own people, Ruthie?
Yes, for sure, if he's acknowledging that 50 members of those 60 were Hamas members, it certainly wasn't to appease the international media that have been screaming that all these poor civilians are being killed. If so, what he was doing is saying, no, actually, they were soldiers, not civilians. And Hamas keeps talking out of two sides of its mouth during this whole thing.
What exactly was Israel supposed to do to stop thousands of people at the fence from crossing over. Isn't that exactly what any sovereign country would do if there were thousands of people trying to cross over?
Okay, let me please first relate to what he said. Okay, indeed they were protesting, but they didn't only demand the right of return. We are talking about people of Gaza who live in a large prison. They live in a ghetto, in a concentration camp where people die of hunger, of shortage of medicine, of shortage of food. 90% of the water in Gaza is undrinkable. 50% unemployment. 50%.
And now to the question about the crossing.
I'm coming to that. Only 4 hours of electricity a day. Can you imagine living with that?
Okay.
So they did indeed want to return. But at the point where they tried indeed to cross the border, was the solution to shoot, to kill? I mean, we've seen footage by the Israeli soldiers showing them killing people who were at a distance from them, and they were crying jubilantly after they killed each and every one of them.
You can react to that.
You could, sorry, just
go ahead, quickly.
So you could neutralize them by shooting them in the legs. Why killing by shooting the head?
There's a question. Why not shoot in the legs? Why not use water cannons or more tear gas? You know, in the West Bank, I've seen riots dispersed without necessarily using live ammunition, some rubber bullets. Why is it like this, Adi?
Well, my expertise is not military, but I would like to answer to your question because you're right. It's a very good question. The situation in Gaza is obviously not great, but the question you have to ask yourself is why. By now, the Gaza Strip has received billions of dollars of aid, and the question is, why is it that the population of Gaza chooses to put its money into tunnels into Israel and not to build their schools, their homes, etc.? And the answer is that the international community has maintained for 70 years the status of refugees in the Gaza Strip unjustifiably, and these people think that their situation is temporary. What does it mean to have today refugees in Gaza? Where are they going to return? They want to return to Ashkelon and Ashdod.
But I want you and Ruthie to answer basically the question that I asked you about how to stop people from crossing the border. Is live ammunition the only way?
If I were a Palestinian, I would certainly want Israel to use live ammunition on all my leaders and on all of Hamas members, because those people, the way you
That's not what I asked, though.
I
asked about the people at the fence.
But the people on the fence, the whole purpose of this was to use civilians to try to break through the fence, and then terrorists would go through the fence once it was broken through.
But wasn't there any other way to stop them from doing that?
Israel thwarted a whole group of us, a terrorist cell that was about to do that.
Why not shoot them in the legs? Why kill them?
Actually,
why a disabled guy was killed, although he was about a kilometer far from the soldiers? He was killed. He was shot in the head. He's disabled. He can't even cross. Why was he killed?
The truth is that I wasn't there, and therefore I don't know what kind of situation it is. It's a very menacing. It's a menacing situation when you are being stormed by thousands of people.
I want to show you something that was written today by Amos Harel, the military pundit analyst, I say, in Haaretz, Israel's left-wing broadsheet. Like with a push of a button and certainly on orders from on high, almost all of the weapons fired on border with the Gaza Strip was halted on Tuesday, the day after that we're talking about. It was a lot more calm. He's saying the violence was substantially curbed as a matter of decision. That Hamas made a decision to lower the flames. Could one say, I'll ask all of you, that Israel actually, in a way, succeeded in getting its message across, that this is, it's not worth it?
By killing people.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying, basically. That's what I'm saying.
Which is ironic. I mean, is that the type of solution you want? To stop protests by killing people?
Answer that, yeah.
Yes, because actually those people were killed by Hamas.
But
that's the point. The point is that you need to
use... if Arabs inside Israel protest and assert their right to protest, and they don't agree to go home, and then the solution is to kill them?
That's different. That's completely different.
They were protesting.
20 seconds before we go for a break.
Quickly. In my view, the whole situation is absurd. That's not a fence, it's an international border. And when 40,000 people...
If it was an international border, wouldn't Gaza be a real state?
That doesn't matter what's the status. It's not a fence.
It's not a state.
Because there is no other state on earth that would accept that 40,000 people, even if they were naked, would come and try to cross the border. That's impossible.
Okay, but is it right to say that it is an international border when it's not really a state recognized by the international community?
I don't know any other country that would allow that. That's absurd.
Adi, I kind of, before we went to a break, kind of cut you off. I want you to finish your thoughts.
Right. I think that we have to see the bigger picture again, because every 2-3 years we have a war in Gaza, and we keep trying to solve the problem with Band-Aid instead of trying to fix the problem from its roots.
Go ahead. How do you fix it? What is it?
You dismantle UNRWA. You explain these people that they're not refugees, and it's time to get real. It's time to resettle. It's time to build their houses and their lives.
And what about lifting the siege?
That's something else, but you must, every action of building a port or reconstructing Gaza should be conditioned on stopping refugee status. They're not refugees.
Really quickly.
Also, you use the word siege.
Yes.
Excuse me. It's a siege against weapons, particularly from Iran, from entering Gaza. Israel sends hundreds of truckloads of humanitarian goods into Gaza every single day. And what's more, Gaza has a border with Egypt, not only with Israel.
Egypt is also part of this closure.
Indeed. I mean, sadly, I must admit that. But
Palestinians aren't on the fences there, are they?
Sorry?
Palestinians aren't writing on the fences of Egypt.
Yeah, because who is imposing siege upon them is Israel, not Egypt.
But you just said that Egypt was also as well imposing the siege.
Yeah, but the occupying power in their eyes, the country that invaded their lands and confiscated their territories is Israel, not Egypt. Now, concerning the money that Adi spoke about, okay, let's assume for the sake of argument that there is indeed a lot of money that comes into Gaza, but they can't buy anything without it. Yesterday, a convoy of Physicians Without Borders carrying only medicine wasn't allowed by Israel to enter the Gaza.
Really quickly, Adi.
Question, what lands Israel occupy right now in Gaza?
For these people, some of the parts that Israel was established on
so the state of Israel within the 1967
Again, I'm explaining the point
I just want to know. I just want to know.
Okay, before you move on, I want to ask one more question before we move on to our next topic. How do you think Israel is looking internationally these days? Because looking at the media and the international media, it seems that the Palestinian narrative is the one that's being adopted, that Israel is using excessive force. Isn't that right?
That's absolutely right, but thank God Trump is in the White House, and finally we have a president who is not accusing Israel of being the perpetrator of all this mess.
Ruth, Adi, sorry.
Well, I think that this is really lamentable because the international community told Israel that you must withdraw from territories that you occupied in 1967 and then everything will be all right. At least for the Gaza Strip, that's exactly what happened. And now the fence, the border actually, is contested all of a sudden. No, it's not contested. That's the border. And each one which calls it a massacre or everything, it's just disqualified itself from raising its voice again.
Okay, I want to move on to our next topic. That is Israel and Turkey. It's been labeled a diplomatic game of tit for tat, but there was nothing diplomatic about the accusations and insults between Ankara and Jerusalem over the past 48 hours. It all began when Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan decided to recall the ambassadors to the U.S. and to Israel in the wake of the opening of the American embassy in Jerusalem and Israel's handling of the Gaza border riots. He then decided to expel the Israeli ambassador in Ankara, Eitan Naeh. Israel responded by asking the Turkish consul in Jerusalem to leave the country. This led the Turkish Foreign Ministry to summon Israel's consul general in Istanbul and ask him to leave the country. The tensions peaked today with the footage published that we're seeing right now on the screen showing Naeh, the Israeli ambassador in Ankara, going through a very strict security check at the airport in front of Turkish media cameras, which were especially invited to cover his departure. And throughout this, Erdogan traded barbs with Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, as the former called Israel a terrorist state, and the latter calling Erdogan a Hamas supporter who well understands terrorism and slaughter. Has this spiraled out of control?
When was it ever under control? The only time, listen, Erdogan is an Islamist tyrant who imprisons everyone in his country who opposes him. Judges, police, journalists, academics. Erdogan is someone who who was responsible for the Mavi Marmara incident, the Free Gaza Flotilla incident in 2010 that caused the main rupture of relations between Israel and Turkey. And in the meantime, Israel paid Turkey millions of dollars and issued an apology and everything. Turkey has done nothing.
Was that a mistake, by the way, to sign that deal?
Oh, absolutely a mistake.
Mouab, does a ruthless autocrat like Recep Tayyip Erdogan, as a man who jails journalists and people who voice opposition, just like Ruthie said, does he have the moral high ground to come and preach to Israel?
It's fascinating that Ruthie is showing such a great pride in Trump, who's a chauvinist, who described women as animals, and at the same time claiming that the elected president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, is a tyrant. Now, concerning this, I consider it whole, a play of politics. Erdogan wants to show his people that he's a strong nationalist, supporter of Muslims and Arabs and the cause, and I understand that. But you mustn't also forget that Turkey, understand very much the security concerns of Israel. Israel. I myself was once delayed by the Turkish Airlines at the airport for 2 hours, and I almost missed my plane to Israel because Turkey understands Israel's interests.
So he's doing this.
Why doesn't Israel understand that the Turkish people also believe in certain causes, like the Palestinian cause, and they want to support the human rights of Palestinians?
Well, I agree with both. Ruthie, I have to add.
Do that?
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Ruthie, you just forgot to mention that he has some Kurdish blood on his hands, Syrian blood on his hands because he's involved in the war. That's one.
By the way, Adi, to be fair, these humiliation techniques aren't solely Turkish. We've seen here in Israel, the deputy foreign minister in the past do some humiliating himself to the Turkish ambassador. Remember putting him on a lower chair?
Yes. When we are talking about the record of human rights and how do you treat other people while fighting them, then participating in the Syrian civil war and bombing Kurdish villages is in a very different
it's a different level.
In a different level. But I agree with Mouad that it's politics. I think personally that Erdogan is a clown and he just needs, he's such, like a child who needs attention.
And he's doing it for his base. I think that's kind of what Mouad was saying. For
I
make points with Muslim countries, right?
Not only that. I mean, the guy is an intelligent person and he wants to show his own positions as a world leader.
But you do agree he's a ruthless autocrat.
He's an anti-Semite.
You don't agree he's an autocrat?
No, I mean, Turkey doesn't have records and reports filed against it by Amnesty, like Israel.
It's a democracy?
Like Israel.
It used to be a democracy. Erdogan turned it into a non-democracy. What's more, do you realize that Erdogan imprisons people who even say that there was an Armenian genocide in Turkey? He's not somebody who is talking on behalf of his...
detention like Israel does. Turkey doesn't even have it.
No.
Israel, there are many prisoners who are held administratively without being tried, without even being accused in court.
What? Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Where would you prefer to spend the night, in an Israeli prison or in a Turkish prison?
Why does it matter? I mean, why do you have to compare that to Turkey? Why don't you compare it to a German?
By the way, it's a good segue to my next question, Ruthie. I'm glad you brought up the Armenian Holocaust, because today the Transportation and Intelligence Minister, Israel Katz, said there is no, quote, there is no moral and historical reason not to acknowledge the Armenian Holocaust in reference to this rising tension between Israel and Turkey. Is that a good idea?
It's first of all, it's a very good idea. Israel should have acknowledged the Armenian genocide a long time ago, and it would have, but that was politics, or more accurately, diplomacy. There were reasons that Israel wanted not to antagonize Turkey, because if the one thing the Turkish government cannot abide is to hear that Turkey committed a genocide against the Armenians.
Same question, good idea?
I think there should be a very careful calculation because there are economic interests and military interests. I don't think that you have to decide if this or that did a genocide just by that in the afternoon. There are many interests, and a wise Israeli policy would take that into consideration. I just think that the less you acknowledge this president, it's better.
The less you do. Okay.
Yeah.
We have to go for another commercial.
Less attention.
Less attention. We'll be right back with Ruthie Blum, Mouab Khetab, and Adi Schwartz. Stick around. Moving on to our next topic. The violence in Gaza is also reverberating inside Israel. Arab Israelis held a general strike today to protest Monday's violence, where 61 Palestinians were killed on the Gaza border. Arab Israeli businesses and public schools went on strike, which was called by the Higher Arab Monitoring Committee in Israel. What is this strike hoping to achieve, Mouad?
Well, first of all, it's a sign of sympathy with our fellow Palestinian people who live in Gaza. Simply, people were killed, were massacred in cold blood, and it is our humanitarian obligation to show sympathy with them, exactly the same way that we show sympathy with Jews who were killed by the Nazi regime.
Ruthie, do you think these events in Gaza will deepen the divide between Arabs here in Israel and the Jews living in Israel as well?
Again, you know, when there's a divide that has been deep all along, it's not going to deepen anymore. It's already deep. Not all Arab Israelis,
such high death tolls.
Not all Arab Israeli citizens have expressed solidarity with Palestinians, and certainly not with terrorists. So the question of whether this deepens a divide, I think it just reiterates a divide that was already there with the more radical elements of the Arab-Israeli population.
All shops were closed today. All shops, in almost all towns.
Well, listen, I wouldn't
So you are
want to
saying
be...
that Arabs in Israel support terrorists in Gaza, and you are again using the wrong term.
No, I'm saying that the
labeling
leadership...
children as terrorists.
No. I actually think that many Arab-Israeli citizens follow their leaders, try to radicalize them. Again, I think the people tend to be moderate on all sides of this issue, and it's the leadership that kind of incites the people to violence.
Would you agree, by the way, with what Ruthie said, Mouab, that it's not unison? There is critique in Arab society in Israel against of Hamas and how it handles things in Gaza. There is, right?
Well, the thing is not what their position on Hamas is, but what their position on killing innocent people is.
Okay.
Their position is clear. We are against killing innocent people everywhere. In Gaza, inside Israel, in Syria. Are you against killing people in Syria? Yeah, of course you are.
Why
are you with killing people? Why are you suddenly describing people in Gaza as terrorists simply because the people on the other side are Israeli soldiers?
Because
they didn't carry arms.
Hamas is a terrorist organization.
What about the people? You can't say that.
Hamas sent those people there to get killed.
Okay, wait.
Not correct. Even if they did, does that give him legitimacy to kill them?
Well, if they're committing an act of aggression.
What kind of aggression? They are just assembling at the border. Is that aggression?
That's a question that I've asked a few times, and I'll ask you as well. Are these people on the fence? It's a really simple question. 2 words. Are they rioters or protesters?
Yes, they're rioters, and they sent Molotov cocktails and kites. They were rioting and
protesters.
They're rioters.
They are rioters.
Yes.
What about Ethiopians who protested in Tel Aviv? Did they give the Israeli police a right to kill them because they were rioters?
It's not the same thing.
Okay, so
because they are not Arabs.
No, not because
you are with killing Arabs. No. Ethiopians is a different thing.
Okay.
No.
Khatib, go ahead, Adi.
There is no border. The issue of running to a border and trying to cross it is obvious, is simple. Everybody in all the world would be shot simply. When 40,000 people run to the border, that's not rioters, that's terrorists, that's even more than that. That's
all those 40,000 people are terrorists?
If they try to cross the border...
All those 40,000 people are terrorists?
If they try to cross the border, they are fighters. And no other country would allow a fighter to cross the border, period.
Why don't you compare to Hungary when Syrian refugees tried to cross the borders? How many of them were killed? None.
Listen.
Answer to that, please. Why don't you comment on that?
When 40,000 people run to the border and try to cross
That's exactly what happened. In fact, it was more than hundreds of thousands.
They were not trying to infiltrate. And this was an enemy act. No,
that's exactly what they did.
They were fleeing.
They crossed the borders without permission. Exactly like people in Gaza. Why weren't they shot and killed?
I would like to know, why don't you ask that question? I don't understand why you're defending terrorists who kill Arabs.
Again, you're describing them as terrorists. I mean, children, 14 and 15 years old. Come on.
Again, I think that this whole discussion is absurd, because we have here a population of 2 million people who do not recognize the right of Israel to exist. They don't want any Jews. As Mouab just said, they think that the whole of the state of Israel is occupied. So what the discussion? First, let them recognize my right to stay here and be free in my country, and then we can discuss other things.
Are you somewhat surprised, Mouab, that the protests here inside Israel, Palestinians in Israel, weren't more harsh or more, even sometimes it's been violent in the past?
What do you mean?
Throwing rocks. This was a fairly subtle, shall I say, protest.
I've took part in almost all protests, and every time there was violence, it was started by the Israeli police. I can say that.
Is that why maybe it was more calm? Because there was a fear of what the Israeli police, how they would respond?
No. I mean, yesterday in Tel Aviv, 2 days ago, at the opening of the new embassy, yes. I mean, there were hundreds who protested.
Outside the ceremony in Jerusalem, yes.
Exactly, yes. And did you see anyone throw a stone?
14 people were arrested.
Exactly. Yes. They were attacked. They were assaulted by the police. Many were arrested, although not one even single stone was thrown.
Did you want to? I thought you wanted to react to that, Ruthie.
No, what I wanted to say to refer to something I said before, and that is, let us remember why Israel disengaged from Gaza in the first place, and that was that there was a suicide bombing war going on against innocent Israelis every single day.
In the Gaza Strip,
no, in Israel.
In Israel. Okay, yes. 10 seconds, 15 seconds, go ahead.
Well, as just Mouad said, the problem is the concept of the Palestinians, that the whole of the land is theirs. It's not about freedom for Palestinians, it's actually about the right of the Jews to self-determination in their country, not the other way around.
Okay, let's move on to our last topic. It's not just the U.S. Guatemala has also moved its embassy to Jerusalem, the first country to follow the U.S. lead. The embassy was inaugurated this morning in a ceremony attended by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Guatemalan President Jimmy Morales. A grateful Netanyahu said at the ceremony that he would visit Guatemala on his next trip to South America. Let's hear some more from the Prime Minister this morning.
Guatemala is opening its embassy in Jerusalem right among the first. You were always among the first. Always among the first. You were the second country to recognize Israel, but you had a very important role in this.
Another important day, Adi?
Yes, I think that this should have happened long ago. I think that all of these embassies should have opened in 1949. There's again an absurdity of international community. The western part of Jerusalem is not contested. And we have now countries who recognize the state of Palestine, have embassies in East Jerusalem, such as Sweden, and still have their embassy in Tel Aviv. So they have to decide. If you acknowledge East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine, then obviously, at least, your embassy should be in West Jerusalem. So there should be more.
Ruthie, do you think we're going to see some more countries follow suit?
Yes, I do, because I think that people are encouraged and emboldened when the President of the United States takes a really tough stance.
What about some major countries, not just Guatemala, like Western European powers or Asian powers?
Not those European countries that spend all their time delegitimizing Israel. that won't happen. Spend time condemning Israel at the United Nations, for example.
I think it's a really good question, because the question is, what's their policy? Do they want to enhance the chances of peace? And if they want to enhance the chance of peace...
Are you talking about the Western European countries?
Yes, exactly. But the UK, France, etc. Then obviously Western Jerusalem is not contested. So what's the message? By not moving their embassy to Western Jerusalem, they're saying to Israelis that even West Jerusalem is contested.
Well, speaking of messages that are being put out there, the Palestinians today called back their representatives from countries who participated in that dedication ceremony of the new U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. We're talking about Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, and others. At this pace, they won't have many friends left soon, will they?
Well, concerning that, I mean, let's first talk about Guatemala, which is probably the second time in my life that I hear such a name. I don't even know where it falls on the map. And Israel is celebrating so greatly. I mean, that Guatemala recognized it or moved its embassy to Jerusalem. What you must seek is the support of, as you just said, the major powers in the world. And those major powers, contrary to what Adi have said, there was a vote in the United Nations Security Council, 14-1 countries voted against or actually supported a resolution condemning this move by the United States. That's the international community.
Let's talk about that U.S. dedication ceremony. There were some pretty controversial figures there, like Pastor Robert Jeffries, who said that religions like Mormonism, Islam, Hinduism, and Judaism not only lead people away from God, they lead people to an eternity of separation from God in hell. He's also said that Jews can't be saved. Mitt Romney and former U.S. Ambassador to Israel Daniel Shapiro said that, specifically Daniel Shapiro said that Israelis should feel embarrassed that this man was at this ceremony. Israelis should be embarrassed?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he would have been my choice, but the fact is he's been extremely pro-Israel from a political standpoint all along.
But if he said either anti-Semitic things or racial things against other religions, is that a person that...
Look, I'm not sure his quotes aren't being taken out of context, because actually what I read is that he did say that Mormonism isn't genuine Christianity, and many Christians
that's
think
besides what I just said.
About what he said about the Jews, it's debatable.
Jews
and
can't
I
be
don't
saved.
want to... I don't know if he actually said it that way, but what I know is my Christian friends have said the following. They said, listen, right now we have to worry about supporting Israel. Those who talk about the end of days, listen, we don't even know what's happening next week, and you're worried about the end of days. I don't think we should worry about that.
It was a very religious ceremony, wasn't it, Adi?
Yeah, in comparison to other ceremonies that we know. The Americans were the organizers. I'm usually not really, I'm not giving such attention to religious figures, pastors, rabbis, etc. So for me, more important was the ceremony itself and less the speeches.
Okay, let's wrap it up in the 3 minutes that we have left. You know, the embassy has moved. There are no negotiations right now. There's no peace process, as Ruthie is like to tell me all the time. And nothing happening soon. It looks like the Trump peace plan isn't going to come out anytime soon. Mahmoud Abbas had some anti-Semitic remarks that he said in the last couple of weeks, and now I'm sure that no Israeli leader will ever want to talk to him until he leaves the stage. Where does this leave us, Mouab?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on that. I mean, let's present facts on the ground. According to international law, this move is completely illegal because the status of Jerusalem is to be determined by the final status negotiations. By this move, Israel and the United States made it clear that they are not interested in any peace talks or any solution.
Okay, and where do you see where it's going next?
Now, actually, based on this, things are going to get worse if U.S. and Trump, I mean, the Trump
means
administration,
what? More violence?
Apparently so, because they are refusing to give people their rights, Palestinians specifically.
Actually, appeasement leads to more violence, not being firm. We see that again and again and again. And the fact is that when there is a firm president in the White House and not an appeaser of Iran or Hamas or Turkey, when you have appeasement, you have war. When you defeat your enemies, then you have a chance for peace.
I'm actually quite optimistic.
Why?
Because
because of the way Trump is handling things?
Perhaps, but it's not a coincidence that the peace process has failed. The peace process currently is built on a lie. And now, perhaps, we are starting to say the truth. The truth is that the Palestinian side refuses to acknowledge Israel's right to exist.
But if nothing happens, doesn't it inevitably lead to a one-state outcome?
No.
What does it lead to? What could it lead to?
I don't think nothing leads.
Continuing
wait a second.
Settlements.
Wait a second. Nothing leads to a one-state solution.
Outcome, not solution.
Outcome or whatever. But I think that when the Palestinians will get a very clear message, which they didn't get until now, that their intransigence will have price, then perhaps they will change the way.
20 seconds, what do you want to react quickly?
I mean, Ruthie here used to live in an illegal settlement, and she comes here to defend, in my opinion, a racist system that is preventing Palestinians from taking their rights and depriving them of their lands, continuing to build illegal settlements.
Really quickly.
I can just say one thing, that illegal settlement, which is called Har Adar, that I used to live in, is everybody in it is a left-wing Israeli who votes for the peace process.
That is all the time we have, guys. Thanks to our panelists, Mouab Khetab, Adi Schwartz, and Ruthie Blum.